submit this question to be answered on the show. Do you believe the traction occurring related to going back to halides for UV is justified? If so, explain what evidence you know of that can lead in that direction. If not, why do you feel the testing and discussions occurring regularly in other hobbyist influence platform is being out correctly, or what could be done better? Okay. This is kind of, I think, what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, the discussion of the UV and metal halide rings all my skeptical bells, because nobody's really provided anything but mind stories. Now, again, people are going to take mind story, just me calling it a mind story, as a negative, and it's not. It's not a negative. It's and we all do mind stories all the time. It's like calling it anecdote. Look, you see me, as you've known me for a while, I change phraseology from time to time because I'm trying a new way to not be taken as an asshole when I'm asking questions. And it's really hard. So, so I want to know. So it rings all my skeptical bells. And why does it ring my skeptical bells? Well, we did a lot of work with UV in the past. All right, UV was a thing in the early 2005s. And lots of people, maybe before, lots of people tried different UV solutions, caused lots of problems, killed shit. And metal halide bulbs need to have a UV filter, otherwise you can get hurt, right? Whether that's in the envelope or on the bulb itself, or you put something in between, right? The DE bulbs, I remember using, it was always like you needed to have a glass in between that would attenuate the UV. So there's a lot's already been done, and nothing's really popped up as useful. And we know about UV in the water and how it attenuates very quickly sometimes in the first meter. I think the study, one of the studies. So people who are on about the UV presented like here's a book about UV. And it's like, well, in that book, here's a paper about UV, and here's some papers. It's like, well, in this paper about UV, it shows that in the best conditions at about 5 meters, there's about 1% UVB, which is what people are talking about now, UVB.
5 meters or 3 meters?
It was 5 meters.
So 15 feet.
Yes. 1% at 15 feet. So I don't remember what the curve was. So I don't remember what it was lower, right? But it's not 100% at 10 feet. I don't know what it is at 2 feet. And in the worst conditions where they tested, where the water was more cloudy, more turbid, it was 1% at 1 meter.
Oh, wow. So if UV is important, I mean, if UV is doing something beneficial for a coral, it's not exactly even making it.
That's what the information we currently have seems to show. Some people are showing different versions of that, but it was like, well, here's a bunch of peer-reviewed stuff that shows that it doesn't get down there really. So that makes me squint, because it's like, well, there is a lot of information about UV penetration in saltwater and in the ocean, and it feels like that hasn't been looked at enough for me to then go spend my time dig deep into it. It's like it's like a potluck. Maybe skepticism is like a potluck. If I'm going to make a big dessert to bring to the potluck, and all you brought is, a cookie, right? Does this analogy make any sense?
Yeah, no, like you brought ambrosia and someone brought just a single chocolate chip cookie from Starbucks.
Yeah. And they were like, oh, here, and I'm going to eat all your food. It's kind of like, it's like, you got to do your diligence if you really want people to pay attention. Now, that's also totally not true, right? Most people aren't looking that deep, and they just go, oh, somebody I respect said that UV is probably a thing or might be a thing. Okay, that's how most of the world works, and that makes complete sense. But I don't feel like they're bringing much what I call compelling evidence to the table for it, right?
Well, and so by talking about this on Reef Beef, this is what I want the listener or the viewer to get out of this is anytime, so that, you know, this is an industry where things crop up on, you know, if you're watching other podcasts and someone makes a statement, even popular people, and then you start hearing it all over the place. Oh, they said this, that, this. Just be skeptical. No need to be cynical, but be skeptical of everything. What I wouldn't want someone to do is, oh, so-and-so said that UV is important, so now UV is important. Be a little skeptical and look into it.
Yeah, and that, I think, is why skepticality is important. Critical thinking is important, because then you look at the claim, and I'm not sure anybody's really saying. They might be, but I'm going to be as super generous. I don't think anybody's really saying, hey, UVB is the answer for all kinds of stuff. I think they're saying, I think it may be the answer.
But people are making equipment.
Are they?
I've seen it. I don't know the name of the companies, but there's people making like bars of like that only sort of put out UV.
That's a reptile thing.
Okay.
That's a reptile thing. So there is a market for it where it makes sense. Now, part of the other in the narrative of the UVB that makes me go, what? There's two other pieces. One is that UVB has germicidal properties. That's true. It does, but not going through water.
Yeah.
Water is a really, really good light UV filter.
Yeah.
And I think salt water is even better, right? The other part that makes me go, is that makes me squint. Sorry. Go, seems worse than saying that makes me squint. I mean it the same way. Is that the argument that, well, we absorb vitamin D through our skin, and that comes from the sunlight, or you know, the reptiles need to have vitamin D through their skin. They need the UV.
Underwater.
They need their UV, right? But those animals don't live in salt water and never come out. So that's. I tried to come up with a. You know, that's like going, well, you know, we breathe air, so fish will do better if they're in air. And that's a terrible analogy, number one, but it gets the feeling across. And the analogy also feels like a dick thing to say. And it's not. It's all analogies are for is to try to get the other person to see your perspective from a different angle that might let them understand better what you're saying.
For whatever reason, sometimes people can get a mind block. Maybe they're even mad because they think you're being cynical instead of skeptical.
Yeah.
And they sort of get stuck. So if you reposition the argument in a different way, they might, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I want you to see it from what I'm seeing. And so often the extreme argument the extreme example is needed to really make that point home. But often the extreme is absurd. And so it feels like an attack. But if you don't do the extreme one, it doesn't have the same effect. It's just like, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's like, I know it doesn't make any sense. I'm trying to hammer this so you see the different thing. There was one other thing in the kind of UV discussions. And then they talk about spectrum, and that, you know, they say that Metal Halide has, you know, a full spectrum. Doesn't. The sun has, you know, what is full spectrum? Here we get right into like bedrock skepticality. I don't know what we're talking about when people say full spectrum, because full spectrum is a marketing term for metal halides. And it, you know, and marketing terms are marketing terms. So metal halides don't really approximate the sun at all. A halide plot is thicker and wider than most LED plots. Okay. But if you compare that plot to sunlight, there's a whole lot of stuff that metal halides are not picking up, right? That are not producing. So if we're going to say UV is important, then the rest of the stuff in the spectrum also needs, the arguments seem to be that to seem to hold for the other stuff that metal halides don't have. The most approximate that I've seen was the rice bulbs, the little plasma bulbs, and those fried corals.
Yeah.
So because it was like the spectrum, and if you put your stuff under the sun, you're gonna have a bad time till they acclimate, whatever that means. So that there's all my skepticality about. I think I've covered all of it. Let me see. Halides or UV, I don't know if they're justified or not. No one's presented any evidence that compels me. Also, corals produce compounds to protect themselves from UV. The corals that got exposed at low tide, those produce a lot of mucus and a lot of compounds as a sunscreen. So, is it good? I don't know if the corals are protecting themselves from it. Does it have germicidal properties or anti-parasitic properties or anti-pest properties that the juice is worth the squeeze for the corals to have to produce all of that mucus? Maybe. But of course, maybe that mucus is what's having the germicidal and anti-parasitic and anti-pest properties.
But also chemotherapy is good at killing cancer, but it's also good at fucking you up too.
That's quite true. And we have example after example of example after example after example after example of baller coral tanks with no UV and no halides.
Yeah.
Right? We had corals that spawn and babies that grow without it. We see just as much, anecdotally, just as much RTN and STN with metal halides as we see without metal halides. So do people, so what are people on the farm seeing? There's a couple of farms that are seeing it. I don't want to name any names because I don't want it mixed up. I love all these people. I like talking to all these people. They're seeing an effect. I don't discount their effect, but before I can jump on the bandwagon, I just need more. It's, we've seen too many things come around like this.
Yeah.
And I think I said, metal halide is and some people are trying to press, Jake Adams into saying, metal halide's the best. And somebody shared a video of Jake saying, no, metal halide is the best. And it's like, he says that, but you have to look at the rest of the 4-minute clip where he says, all things being equal, yeah, metal halides, I like metal halide the best, but all things are not equal.
Yeah.
And then he talks about why he's not using halides.
Yeah.
So, it isn't just one thing. And also, I'm pretty sure we're going to see halides just go away. There's just,
totally.
They're being phased out. They got mercury in them. They're just not, they're not a great thing, and people don't dispose of them properly. And why are we doing this extra work? And
I've heard that T5 is headed in that direction as well.
I would expect all of these, given LEDs, unless we find something terrible about LEDs, like they're causing, people to
turn green.
I expect all of them to go away because LEDs are just kind of better for the environment.